Hey guys. So, I know I talked about the Bucks a few days ago with the Myles Turner Dame stuff, and yeah, Giannis popped up many times in that video, but it was just brief mentions of me being like, well, he doesn't want to go. They don't want to trade him, so there you go. I figured why not do a video about it. This is mostly going to be from the Bucks' perspective in my eyes, and I'll just say for Giannis, I think it's cool that he wants to be in Milwaukee. Some of this was after listening to Zach Lowe and Howard Beck talk about the Bucks, and Bill Simmons. He said he would just trade Giannis and all that. And this is nothing against Bill, but it got me thinking some, and maybe you've seen it in other places. The conversation around Giannis has been heating up lately, especially with the Bucks' recent struggles and the constant speculation about whether they should blow it up or double down. But I think people are missing some crucial context here about what trading Giannis would actually mean for this franchise, both in the short term and the long term. Of course, there is the obvious of just everything Giannis means to the fan base, to the franchise. And if Giannis was not on the team, the Bucks become irrelevant. This isn't just about basketball impact, though that's enormous, it's about the entire identity of the organization. Giannis transformed Milwaukee from a forgotten small market team into a global brand. He brought them their first championship in 50 years, and his presence alone keeps the franchise relevant in national conversations. Yeah, they could, if they really wanted to move him, they could get just an obscene amount of draft picks, right? They could get A+ES from ESPN and CBS and whoever the hell else does like trade grades and stuff. The media would probably praise them for getting maximum value, for being smart about asset management. But here's the thing about trade grades, they're often evaluated in a vacuum without considering what losing that player actually means to the organization's future prospects, fan engagement, and overall relevance in the league. And also, your fans now just don't care for a while. And that while can be a very long time, because let me tell you, as someone who really got into the NBA in the mid-2000s, even with the Giannis era, the Bucks have still spent more of my life not matching. Let me expand on that point about the Bucks not matching for most of my basketball watching life. Before Giannis, this franchise was the definition of NBA purgatory. They had some decent seasons here and there, made the playoffs occasionally, but they were never a team that casual fans cared about. They weren't must-see TV. They weren't moving the needle nationally. The biggest storyline around the Bucks for years was whether they'd eventually relocate because of attendance and revenue issues. When I got into the NBA in the mid-2000s, the Bucks were just another small market team trying to find their way. They had some solid players, guys like Michael Redd, who was actually pretty good, but they were never championship contenders. They were the kind of team that might steal a playoff series if everything went right, but more often than not, they were just making up the numbers. The fact that even during the Giannis era they've still spent more of my basketball watching life being irrelevant really puts into perspective how rare and valuable what they have right now actually is. This isn't just about basketball success, it's about cultural relevance, about having a franchise that people across the country and around the world actually care about. That's not something you can easily replace with draft picks, and if they were to trade Giannis, there's no guarantee at all that they get back to where they are right now with him, Myles Turner, a bunch of role players, and a Damian Lillard waived and stretched contract that goes out for a while. I've already talked about the move, but Myles Turner is a good fit. I do think the Bucks are a playoff team in the East because Giannis is that good, and the bottom of the East especially is pretty bad. This is where the rebuild conversation gets really interesting to me. People talk about trading Giannis like it's a surefire way to set up the franchise for long-term success, but rebuilds are incredibly difficult to execute successfully. Look at how many teams have been stuck in rebuilding mode for years, cycling through coaches, front office executives, and young players without ever putting together a competitive team. The idea that you can just trade your superstar, collect assets, and automatically be back in contention in a few years is a fantasy that doesn't match reality. The current Bucks roster, even with its flaws, gives them a real chance to compete every single season. Giannis alone makes them a playoff team, and with the right adjustments and health, they could absolutely make noise in the postseason. That's not something you give up lightly. The other thing too is that the Bucks do not have most of their own picks for the foreseeable future, right? And so even if you did trade Giannis, and even if you got the most insane draft pick young player haul that a team has ever gotten, and you could definitely get that, by not having your own picks, you're still not going to be able to pull off a full rebuild. This is the part that I think gets overlooked in a lot of these trade Giannis conversations. The Bucks have already mortgaged their future to build around Giannis. They traded away multiple first-round picks to get Damian Lillard. They've made other moves over the years that have cost them draft capital. So even if they got back a treasure chest of picks and young players for Giannis, they're still going to be hamstrung by the fact that they don't control their own destiny in terms of draft positioning. Most successful rebuilds are built around a combination of your own high lottery picks because your team is bad and additional assets you've acquired through trades. The Bucks would only have half of that equation. They'd have the assets from a Giannis trade, but they wouldn't have their own picks to supplement those assets. That makes the rebuild process significantly more complicated and uncertain. The only way you could get picks that could actually fuel a rebuild for you in a Giannis trade would be if you got picks that a certain team who wants Giannis owns that actually belong to another team, and that team is bad, right? And so you think about, well, the Rockets have the Suns picks. Bro, the Rockets have 2 Suns picks left. And yeah, those are amazing assets that the Rockets can either use themselves or trade for something. But if I'm going to be putting myself in NBA irrelevancy for however long for a treasure chest of draft picks and the prize of those picks are 2 chances at getting a top guy in the lottery, that doesn't feel great. The Houston example is perfect because it shows how even when you have other teams' picks, those picks might not be as valuable as you hope. The Suns were supposed to be bad when the Rockets acquired those picks, but they've been more competitive than expected. So those picks, while still valuable, aren't the lottery gold mine they were projected to be. And that's just 2 picks. Even if the Bucks could get similar assets in a Giannis trade, is that really worth giving up a generational talent who's still in his prime? Especially because whatever team I'm trading Giannis to is going to be good because they have Giannis. This is the fundamental problem with trading superstars. The picks you get back are automatically devalued because that player is going to make their new team better. Now, specifically for the Rockets, you could get into the weeds of, well, is Amen in the trade for Giannis? Something like that, right? And I love Amen. He's not going to be Giannis. And again, you still would not have your own picks. And this goes to just the idea of a rebuild and all that. The Rockets have some really intriguing young talent, Amen Thompson, Alperen Sengun, Jalen Green, and they have those Suns picks I mentioned. In theory, they could put together a really compelling package for Giannis. But here's the thing about Amen Thompson, and this applies to any young player you might get back in a Giannis trade. He's a really promising prospect with a lot of upside, but he's not Giannis Antetokounmpo. Giannis is a 2-time MVP, a Finals MVP, a Defensive Player of the Year. He's already accomplished everything you hope a young prospect might someday accomplish. The gap between promising young player and established superstar is enormous, and most prospects never bridge that gap. Even if Amen develops into a really good player, and I think he will, the chances of him becoming as good as Giannis are incredibly slim. And that's not a knock on Amen, that's just the reality of how rare players like Giannis are. So you're essentially trading a sure thing for a maybe, and that doesn't make a lot of sense when you're trying to win championships. Dude, look at the Jazz right now. Okay, the Jazz got so many picks for Gobert and Mitchell, and they got a little bit more for Conley. And what has happened? It's a few years later. They're not good. Yeah, they got Markkanen and Kessler, and we'll see with Ace Bailey, but I do not see the light at the end of the tunnel for the Utah Jazz rebuild. The Jazz are the perfect example of why the trade your stars for picks strategy isn't foolproof. They got an absolute haul for Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. The trade packages were massive, multiple first-round picks, pick swaps, young players. On paper, it looked like they set themselves up perfectly for a rebuild. But here we are, several years later, and they're still not good. They're still not close to being good. Lauri Markkanen has been a nice surprise. Walker Kessler looks promising. But where's the franchise-changing talent? Where's the next superstar? The other thing that happened too, yes, they got a whole bunch of picks for Gobert and Mitchell, but the teams who got Gobert and Mitchell are good because of those guys. And so therefore, the picks that they got, they're not lottery picks. The Timberwolves made the conference finals with Gobert. The Cavaliers are a playoff team with Mitchell. So the picks Utah got back aren't nearly as valuable as they would have been if those players had failed with their new teams. Don't get me wrong, there's value in a draft pick no matter where it is. But if you want to imagine Giannis ending up somewhere, they got all the picks. Hooray! Well, guess what, bro? Giannis is going to drag whatever team he's on to at least 40-some wins probably. And if he's got good talent around him, then okay, they're contenders. This is the fundamental issue with trading superstars for future picks. Those picks become less valuable because the superstar makes their new team better. Look at any Giannis trade scenario. Whether it's the Rockets, the Heat, the Warriors, whoever, any team that acquires Giannis immediately becomes a playoff team at minimum. If they surround him with decent talent, they become a contender. That means the picks you're getting back are going to be in the 20s, maybe the teens if they get unlucky with injuries. But they're not going to be lottery picks, and lottery picks are where you find franchise-changing talent. The other thing, too, is with the new lottery odds, lottery picks, they're still very valuable, but they're not as valuable as they used to be. The flattened lottery odds mean that even if you do get lucky and land a high pick, your chances of getting the first overall pick aren't as high as they used to be. So even the most valuable picks aren't as valuable as they once were, which makes the entire strategy of trading stars for picks less appealing. Now, this is all hypothetical. We've seen rebuilds go extremely well. Look at the Thunder. And the whole thing was fueled by the PG and Russ trades, right? Well, those guys are now Giannis level. Yes, Russ was extremely important to OKC, but I will keep on harping on this. Even after those trades, the Thunder still had their own picks. The Bucks would not. The Thunder are the gold standard for how to execute a rebuild in the modern NBA, but their situation was fundamentally different from what the Bucks would be facing. When OKC traded Paul George and Russell Westbrook, they got back a massive haul of picks and young players. But here's the crucial difference, they still had their own picks. They knew they were going to be bad, which meant they were going to have high lottery picks to supplement all the assets they acquired in those trades. That's what allowed them to draft guys like Josh Giddey and Chet Holmgren and to have so many assets that they could be aggressive in trades. The Bucks wouldn't have that luxury. They'd have whatever they got back for Giannis, but they wouldn't have their own picks to fall back on. That makes the rebuild process much more difficult and uncertain. The Thunder model works when you have control over your own destiny through the draft. Without that, you're entirely dependent on the assets you acquire through trades, and that's a much riskier proposition. And if I own a future Bucks pick and they call me and say, hey, we're trying to trade Giannis, can you give us our pick back? No, buddy. I want that pick more than anything. This is such an important point that I don't think gets discussed enough. The teams that own the Bucks' future picks have no incentive to help them rebuild. In fact, they have every incentive to keep those picks because they know the Bucks are going to be bad without Giannis. Think about it from the perspective of whatever team owns those picks. If the Bucks call and say they want to trade Giannis and they need their picks back to facilitate a proper rebuild, why would you help them? You'd much rather have them be bad and give you a high lottery pick. It's not personal, it's just business. But it puts the Bucks in an impossible situation where they can't execute a proper rebuild even if they wanted to. This is why trading away future picks to acquire talent is such a double-edged sword. It works great when you're competing for championships, but it severely limits your flexibility if things don't work out. The Bucks made those trades because they believed in their championship window with Giannis, and they were right, they won a championship. But now they're stuck with the consequences of those decisions. Now, I mentioned Houston, right? Houston was in a similar situation where they had already dealt picks. I'm pretty sure their own picks. They had to trade Harden because he's forcing his way out. And now they are my most anticipated team to watch for this upcoming season, right? It took them a long time to get here, man. They were really bad for 3 years and they had the KD trade basically fall in their lap with what they gave up. The Rockets are actually a great example of how difficult it is to rebuild when you don't have your own picks. After they traded James Harden, they were stuck in this weird middle ground where they weren't good enough to compete, but they also didn't have their own picks to benefit from being bad. They had to get creative, making trades like the one that brought them Alperen Sengun, finding value in the middle of the draft, and getting lucky with some of their picks. But really what I'm getting at is this rebuild stuff is not a guarantee, man. They can still get picks, swaps, protections, Pelicans, Hawks situation, but you get what I'm saying. Even the Rockets, who I think have done a good job with their rebuild, took years to get to this point and they needed some luck along the way. And they're still not a playoff team yet, they're just a team with a lot of potential. That's not something you give up a 2-time MVP for. The other thing too, so Giannis is 30. He'll turn 31 in December. And one idea that I've seen talked about online is, well, how will Giannis's game age? He's very reliant on his strength and athleticism and coordination and all that stuff. I believe, assuming that Giannis does not deal with a bunch of injuries, it's going to be similar to LeBron, where I still think that Giannis is just so athletic right now that even when he does see some of that natural decline, he's still going to be super athletic. This is where I think people are being way too pessimistic about Giannis's future. Yes, he's 30, but 30 is not old in today's NBA. Players are taking better care of their bodies, sports science has advanced, and we're seeing guys play at a high level well into their 30s. LeBron is 39 and still playing at an all-star level. Kevin Durant is 35 and still one of the best players in the league. Giannis is just entering what should be his peak years. I mean, hell, you look at Russ, and yes, I understand Russ is a totally different player at this stage of his career than what Giannis will be, what LeBron is, etc., but even Russ is still able to get to the basket. Results may vary when he gets there, but he can still do it. He can still push in transition. If Russell Westbrook, who's had a much more reckless style of play throughout his career, can still be effective at 35, why wouldn't Giannis be able to maintain his level for several more years? And then also, I mean, we saw Giannis be a better mid-range shooter this season. They were going with point Giannis towards the end of the season when Dame was out. Like, his handle and his passing game are there. So, I think Giannis will age very well, assuming that he doesn't get unlucky with a lot of bad injuries. This is the part that gives me the most confidence in Giannis's longevity. His skill development hasn't plateaued. He's still adding new elements to his game. When Giannis first came into the league, he was this raw, athletic project. He could run and jump and make plays in transition, but his half-court game was limited. He couldn't shoot, his handle was shaky, his passing was basic. But every year he's added something new. He developed a reliable free-throw routine. He improved his mid-range shooting. He became a better playmaker. He added post moves. He became a better defender. The fact that he's still developing new skills at 30 suggests that he's not just relying on athleticism, he's becoming a more complete player. Players who continue to develop their skills tend to age better than players who rely solely on physical gifts. And when you have Giannis's level of athleticism as your baseline, even a decline still leaves you with elite physical tools. I think he has at least 5 more years of elite play in him, probably more. And I know he's had some playoff runs messed up or just ruined by injuries, but for the majority of his career, he has not missed a lot of games. So there you go. There's a chance this video ages really badly, but I don't know. Just felt like talking. The injury concern is real. We've seen how injuries have affected some of his playoff runs, but his overall track record is pretty good. He's not a guy who's constantly dealing with nagging injuries or missing significant time. Looking at the totality of the situation, I just don't see a compelling argument for trading Giannis. The Bucks have a championship-level player in his prime, they're in a competitive conference where they can make noise in the playoffs, and the alternatives: rebuild without your own picks, hope that young players develop into stars, pray that everything goes right, are so much more uncertain. The rebuild path is littered with failed attempts, and the Bucks would be attempting it with significant disadvantages. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a trade out there that makes sense. Maybe the rebuild would work out better than I think. But based on everything we've seen from similar situations around the league, I think the Bucks are better off trying to build around Giannis while they have him. He's 30, not 35. He's still elite, still developing his game, still capable of carrying a team to a championship. That's not something you give up lightly, especially when the alternatives are so uncertain. Just my thoughts on the whole situation.